Here we go.
Good afternoon.
Speak up.
I think we're going to start today, if we have any viewers.
I don't know yet.
I have to ask my assistant here.
I don't see why we wouldn't. I would assume that we do.
We're going to assume. Due to some of the things that are happening as I speak, as we discuss in our government and here in Nevada in our state government, I think it's important that we take a look at multiculturalism, diversity if you prefer the term, were both planned Marxist terms because they hide behind them. And I have an article by William Lent on the Bankster site that I don't know whether anybody has read. But on October 25th, 2005, this is reprinted with the author's permission, by the way, in his column on the next conservatism, Paul Weyrich several times referred to cultural Marxism. He asked Lynn, as a Free Congress Foundation resident historian, to write a column explaining cultural Marxism, what it is and where it came from. In order to understand what something is, you have to know its history. Cultural Marxism is a branch of Western Marxism, different from the Marxism-Leninism of the old Soviet Union. It is commonly known as multiculturalism, or less formally, political correctness. From its beginning, the promoters of the cultural Marxism have known they could be more effective if they conceal the Marxist nature of their work, hence the use of terms such as multiculturalism, diversity, and political correctness. Cultural Marxism began not in the 1960s, but in 1919, immediately following World War I. Marxist theory had predicted that in the event of a European war, the working class all over Europe would rise up to overthrow capitalism and create communism. Now, what's interesting about that statement is that communism is basically fascism, which Mussolini defined as the merger of capitalism or corporatism. He said it should more directly be called corporatism because it's the merger of corporations with the state, which is what we're seeing today. Anyway, cultural Marxism began in 1919, following the World War I, because Marxist theory had predicted in the event of a big European war, middle class all over Europe, the working class, would rise up to overthrow capitalism and create communism. But when the war came in 1914, it didn't happen. When it finally did happen, in Russia in 1917, the workers in other European countries did not support it. What had gone wrong? Independently, the two Marxist theorists, Antonio Gramsci in Italy and George Lukács in Hungary, came to the same answer. Western culture and Christian religion had so blinded the working class to its true Marxist class interests that communism was impossible in the West until both could be destroyed. In 1919, Lucas asked, quote, "Who will save us from Western civilization?" That same year, when he became Deputy Commissioner of Culture in the short-lived Bolshevik Bela Khan government in Hungary, one of his first acts was to introduce sex education into Hungary's public schools. He knew that if he could destroy the West's traditional sexual morals, he would have taken a giant step toward destroying Western culture itself. In 1923, inspired by Lukács, the group of German Marxists established a think tank in Frankfurt University in Germany called the Institution of Social Research. The institute, soon known simply as the Frankfurt School, would become the creator of cultural Marxism. To translate Marxism from economic into cultural terms, the members of the Frankfurt School, Max Horkheimer, Theodor Andro, Wilhelm Rich, Erich Fromm, and Herbert Marcuse, to name the most important, had to contradict Marx on several points. They argued that culture was not just part of what Marx had called society's superstructure, but an independent and very important variable. They also said that the working class would not lead a Marxist revolution because it was becoming part of the middle class, the hated bourgeoisie. Who would then? In the 1950s, Marcuse answers the question: a coalition of blacks, students, feminist women, and homosexuals. Faithfully, for America, when Hitler came to power in Germany in 1933, the Frankfurt School fled and reestablished itself in New York City. There it shifted its focus from destroying traditional Western culture in Germany to destroying it in the United States. To do so, it invented critical theory. What is the theory? To criticize every traditional institution, starting with family, brutally and unremittingly, in order to bring them down. It wrote a series of studies in prejudice which said that anyone who believes in traditional Western culture is prejudiced, a racist, or a sexist, or fascist, and is mentally ill. Most importantly, the Frankfurt School crossed Marx with Freud, taking from psychology the technique of psychological conditioning. We'll get into the behavioral sciences later. Today, when the cultural Marxists want to do something like normalize homosexuality, they do not argue the point philosophically. They just beam television show after television show in every American home where the only normal-seeming white male is a homosexual, and the Frankfurt School key people spent war years in Hollywood. After World War II ended, most members of the Frankfurt School went back to Germany, but Herbert Marcuse stayed in America. He took the highly abstract works of other Frankfurt School members and repackaged them in ways that college students could read and understand. In his book, Eros and Civilization, he argued that by freeing sex from any restraints, we could elevate the pleasure principle over the reality principle and create a society with no work, only play. Marcuse coined the phrase, "make love, not war." He also argued for what he called liberating tolerance, which he defined as tolerance for all ideas coming from the left and intolerance for any ideas coming from the right. In the 1960s, he became chief guru of the New Left, and he injected the cultural Marxism of the Frankfurt School into the baby boom generation to the point where it is now America's state ideology. The next conservatism should unmask multiculturalism and political correctness and tell the American people what they really are: cultural Marxism. Its goal remains what Lucas and Gramsci set in 1919, destroying Western culture and the Christian religion. It has already made vast strides toward that goal. But if the average American found out that political correctness is a form of Marxism, different from the Marxism of the Soviet Union, but Marxism nonetheless, it would be in trouble. The next conservatism needs to reveal the man behind the curtain, old Karl Marx himself. What became of education in the United States? This is a long history, but I used an article, Climate of Freedom editorial, from the Saturday Review in July 19th, 1952, to start with, and we'll get into it a lot deeper. Does anybody have any questions?
At this moment, no.
Okay. The dumbing down of our educational institutions was planned from the earliest attempts to install the League of Nations by the Roundtable groups. In America, it was then Mandel House organized inquiry group. When the League failed, the inquiry group evolved into the Council on Foreign Relations, and by World War II, even though Americans were unaware, because the controlled media never used the new label, the Allies were already being called the United Nations in Europe and elsewhere in the world. And of course, the United Nations was born. Nearly every member of the U.S. delegation to the formation of the UN was also a ranking member of the CFR. And who were the promoters of seating the center of the UN, the building on the East River? The Soviets. All those leaders were KGB butchers. And for years to come, they would chair the UN Security Council. The FBI, when exposing Algar Hess, pointed to the UN as its center on the, and its center on the East River as the primary source of entry for the commies infiltrating our country. The National Education Association was quick to adopt the formation of the UN as a hope for the world.
I have a question. What is multiculturalism, and is it the same as communism?
What is cultural Marxism? Cultural Marxism is a branch of Western Marxism. Different from the Marxism-Leninism of the old Soviet Union, it is commonly known as multiculturalism, diversity, or less formally, political correctness. From its beginning, the promoters of cultural Marxism have known that they could be more effective if they concealed the Marxist nature of their work, hence the use of terms such as multiculturalism. Cultural Marxism began not in the 60s, but in 1919.
Cultural Marxism, question mark?
Again?
Well, cultural Marxism, communism, okay, fascism. I mean, it's like, aren't these all the same thing, essentially?
They are essentially the same, yes.
Okay, because it's like...
They shifted their ways and means from direct conflict to multiculturalism.
What was direct conflict? And
World War I, World War II.
What ism was that? Was there no ism for that?
They were behind it because it was a way to create the paradigm shift they wanted.
Okay.
The multiculturalism is a more subtle way to manipulate politicians and government.
Okay. And people,
Because they can scream racist, they can scream sexist, homophobia.
okay, give us a modern day example of an instance that is a multicultural, like, you know, I know you're talking about homosexuality, you know, like give us an example of when this happened, like so people have a clear-cut idea of that. You know?
When they made the push for sex education in our schools.
So feminism?
Feminism, the same thing in the 60s.
Okay.
Feminism, as a matter of fact, one of my longest relationships was with a gal who, while I was in Vietnam, she was in the Hyatt area in San Francisco.
Look at the camera.
And she was there when I can't remember the lady's name, but she owned the Houston newspaper. She was the head of the WACS in World War II. And her and Gloria Steinem went to the Hyatt area and held studies on unisex, gender confusion, homosexual rights, gay rights, and actually employed it as a political process, and it was a Marxist ploy. Another one, political correctness. You take an honest politician, an honest man, woman, and to campaign, if you're campaigning to win. You dare not say anything that's not politically correct, because the communists in both parties, those who might not be card-carrying communists but follow the Marxist globalist concept, the socialist concept of the one world government, will blow you out of the water. For instance, one of the best ones I can think of right offhand is rap music today. In rap music, we talked about, we had the feminist movement of the 60s and you know, the feminist movement was all about liberating women, destroying the family, and to what objective? Well, we see the destruction of the family. And yet, in rap music, even the female rappers are self-denigrating. You hear the words, all the words that if a politician even uttered, they would be stormed out of their careers. And these people use that and vulgarity and decadence, and our youth is awash with it. And we have government regulation of everything else, and the FCC regulates everything else, but there's not any attempt to censor that as a violation of free speech. However, if a young person in school wants to pray, they are disciplined for hate crime.
There's another question on that. What is the real nature of God and the founding of our country?
Well, if one studies history, the history of the Puritans, they'll find out that they were financed by the East and West India Company. They were financed by the bankers to settle this country. They had a vested interest in settling this country that we'll get into in our history discussions. But you'll find like Raleigh, that the original, I think it was Sir Gilman, and that name may be wrong, but anyway, he was a cousin of Sir Walter Raleigh. And so he held the title of knight. And the royals were duped into allowing the formidable mercantile system to settle this country, thinking that they had control of it. And basically the revolution was about divesting the royals of their power in America, and through America in Europe. We'll get into all that in detail later on. So what you have to be aware of is that you take an honest man, and the first thing he does is compromise his convictions, his principles, by not uttering the truth or in any way to offend anyone. That's the first step. Then he gets into the position and he is more vulnerable to additional corruption through coercion, peer pressure, all the things we see going on in Congress today. We see, anybody that's paid attention to the last 3 or 4 years, in fact anybody really paid attention for the last 50, knows that there's no difference between the different sides of the aisles. It's a Hegelian game. It's a Hegelian dialect, which was adopted by the Marxists. They changed Hegel's dialectic somewhat, but it was corrupt to begin with, and they shifted it to Marxist materialism. Well, what all the ones that are all these people that are screaming about free enterprise, screaming about capitalism, they don't even understand what capitalism is. We don't live, or we don't have any capitalistic system. We have a corporate system. Corporate capitalism is entirely different from laissez-faire free enterprise. Entirely different.
Can you define those terms?
Laissez-faire, I have defined it several times as a matter of fact. Laissez-faire is the freedom of property, of production, without interference, in fact, in total abstinence of government regulation. As far as community goes, it's the freedom of everyone to pursue their prosperity, life, love, and happiness without the interference of others, as long as they don't step on anybody's toes. And communities determine that if there's a violation, not by restricting the rights, the natural rights of anyone.
Another question on that point, if you don't mind, was came from someone who had seen a Ron Paul supporter talking to a hardcore Romney supporter, and the Romney supporter had said to him, "How do you, in a free market society, account for research and development? How do you fund that?" Does that make sense as a question to you?
No.
Okay.
And the reason is because the Romney argument, or the Romney supporter, was directly referencing, or directly, without saying it, pointing to government as the
Only
source, and that's not true. There's nothing more anti-progressive than the progressive movement. I mean, it's an oxymoron. We got a guy in the Philippines that's been driving a car for the last 3 decades on water. He started out with fresh water, and now he's running on salt water. But they wouldn't allow him to manufacture them, and none of them would buy into it, because it would completely restrict the profiteering of the automotive industry. There's the air car in Europe, another example. They want to talk about fuel, and they want to, ethanol. Of all the dumb things, that they're going to use corn, but it takes more crude oil to produce a gallon of ethanol than you'd run in your car. So it's an oxymoron. It's stupid. But they sell us these stupid ideas. Here's another one. You've got buses now, and you've got talking about natural gas. The reason that natural gas didn't become, they're pumping it back into the ground, by the way, in some areas where they're pumping old crude. Natural gas, you don't have the wear on the components in a car, on an engine, and so therefore it's not profitable for industry to use them. Why? Because industry and production by the capitalists, by the corporates, by the corporations, is dependent on resale. That's why they come up with all these new gimmicks to sell something new. But they want to control it. There's just no end to it. The Department of Energy. Nothing has been more restrictive of energy than the Department of Energy. Now they pump billions of dollars in the Department of Energy that does nothing except regulate against us, against our our needs, our energy needs. Tesla, there's a good one. Tesla, back at the turn of the century, was determined to provide free energy for everyone. And he proved that he could do it. What did they do? They destroyed him. And by the way, he had 9 cases before the Supreme, or a case before the Supreme Court, where Edison had robbed him of 9 patents, and he won the case. So you see, Edison was a profiteer. I mean, he had a lab, he had a lot of people working for him. What he actually was responsible for inventing, I don't know. I know there was a big fight over AC, alternate current and parallel current, and he lost that battle. Tried to use an electric chair and it didn't work. And they switched to the AC. But you have AC today because he was able to rob the original inventor. Somewhat anyway. Westinghouse helped. At any rate, you go back through history and you find all these ambiguities, contradictions to what we were taught in school, and you begin digging into them, and you find most of the history. And I mean, they don't teach history anymore; they teach sociology. Well, what is sociology? It's social designing. Our schools were turned into behavioral labs so that they can turn out the obedient citizen. And what is the obedient citizen but a slave? They train you for a job, not a liberal arts degree. Like Lawrence Rockefeller later in life said, his father was John D. Jr., or David Jr. David came out. He avoided the schooling that the other 4 boys were given. But Lawrence Rockefeller said that he always regretted that he never learned to read or write. He was sent to a Lincoln school at Columbia University, as were 3 of his brothers, Nelson included. Nelson said it was torture for him to read, but he forced himself to do it. So these purveyors of the lies, like Rockefeller, who basically bought the educational system along with Carnegie and I forget the other guy's name right offhand, but I'll get it. Basically bought the educational system, set up the National Education Association, which isn't about teachers. The Teachers Association came in later. These were about the principals and the textbook publishers and what have you. They were all became part of it. Rockefeller also set up the AMA, American Medical Association. He had and has now, I'm sure, the lab up in New England where they were developing profitable pharmaceuticals through shadow pharmaceutical, or through the public pharmaceutical companies. The NDA, he set that up too. So you see these corporate moguls, in their generosity and their charitable activities. By the way, Frederick Gates was Rockefeller's philanthropic administrator, and his son Junior worked with him. And I've been trying to discover if Bill Gates is some distant kin of his, but I haven't found any connection. But some of his some of Gates and Rockefeller's habits, Bill Gates today follows that same pattern. They would fly and travel coach to get the feel or vibe of the common man. Engage in conversation with ordinary people and get a feel of the common people. Bill Gates did the same thing. Their private lives they kept very private. Went to great lengths to keep their families separated from the public. Bill Gates did the same thing. So when you draw these likenesses, he either studied these people or he is a product of their progeny, which is very possible. Not just because of the name, because they changed names. He does have a connection to the German philosophers and the Brits. And I ask you a question. I would ask you all to discover the commonality between Hegel, Wundt, all these ideologues, even Jean-Jacques Rousseau, and the philosophers and the early psychologists. They have a common genealogy. Many of our presidents have a common genealogy. If you study Marxism, Engels, Marx, some of their letters to their associates, you make some pretty eye-opening discoveries. I'm not going to tell you because it's your responsibility to find out, and I give enough information on Bankster Fables, excuse me. It wasn't a slip, I did it on purpose. To give you key readings that will take you to that information. I have a new book that I'm recommending, The Ruling Elite by Deanna Spangola. I'll have a review. It's a lengthy volume, but worth the reading because it'll give you a background on the instigators of the destruction of our country. And a lot of information about Marxism and its paradigm shifts and what have you. There's another one by Diana West. I think it's Diana. My wife recommended it. I just ordered it. If you haven't seen The Invisible Empire, the documentary, you need to. Another one is Monsanto. That's a DVD too, for those of you who don't want to read. I'm not being derogatory here. I just know how hard it is to get people to read. If you've ever gotten involved in reading science fiction, in reading murder mysteries, reading dramas, even the classics, intrigues, read your history, study your history, dig out the history, the real history. There aren't any greater intrigues. I mean, murder, millions. I mean, they talk about we hear on the news all the time about these serial killers and these da-da-da, and there have been no greater serial killers than our government and the other governments and their leaders, the royals, for that matter.
Some of the most intriguing webs that you'll ever read, right? Conspiracies of reality, you know.
Yeah, exactly, exactly.
Before you log off today, can you touch on the raw milk and the Valley F in ozone pollution?
Oh, okay. I just put an article up on Bankster Fables. In the review on May 7th, the review, Journal Review, the View that they put out, had an article about the F we got in pollution here in the valley, here in Las Vegas. I wrote an article about the chemtrails, the aerosol spraying, that goes on constantly over our city, and gave some information and facts. The CDC report, why they gagged the EPA from even talking about it, and asked the question: is it our industry and our businesses that are creating the pollution problem here, or is it this toxic waste that they're spraying all over our city? You can see them constantly crisscrossing each other and this and that, creating cloud covers, and the toxicity of that spraying is incredible. In 2010, in California, one of the geoengineering authorities spoke. It's in the article. In San Diego, it said that they were going to start using new aluminum sulfite instead of what were they using? Anyway, they were going to switch to aluminum sulfate. Well, the levels, I mean, barium and all this stuff attacks the immune system. You're breathing the air. It's basically terraforming. And terraforming to what? Well, about the same time all this was going on, a specialist, Dr. Sandra, and I can't pronounce her last name, it's in the article. She was doing the study down in Arizona of this chemtrail aerosol spraying, and the toxic levels were just outrageous. And the government admitted that they were spraying it. And this geoengineering authority discussed it. Bill Gates supports it. Of course, he's going after zero CO2. I'm not real sure how he figures the planet's going to survive.
It's an easy equation. It's, P times C times kill everybody 8 times.
I don't really understand how he figures that zero CO2 is going to be any advantage for him, because without CO2 the planet dies. Of course, the Monsanto, I was going to say that Monsanto, during the same time this was going on in 2010, had just come out with an aluminum resistant seed. So it's obvious that they have some kind of handle on what's being sprayed and why. We're working on it. But back to Gates and his zero CO2. Let me tell you folks, if there's any tree huggers out there, please Think about this. Every year, volcanic activity and brush fires, like in California, there's so many, and Texas and what have you, put out more greenhouse gases than humanity has in its entire existence on this planet. Think about that. How insane. I mean, we're just a little bitty pebble in the pool. Our contribution to greenhouse gases is totally insignificant. What makes it appear to be more is in the cities because of the concentration of population. As Ben Franklin said, and I'm going to tell you something, it's got nothing to do with modern industry. If we didn't have modern industry, it would be the sewage. Because just imagine, do you know that there was more pollution in London back before all the modern technology and all the plumbing and indoor plumbing and what have you, and modern sewage techniques? There was more just from the dung and waste. So all this argument, Ben Franklin said it best. He said that when American cities became so congested as European cities, America would become just as corrupt. And what did they do? They've systematically driven the farmers from the farms and rural people from the rural areas into the cities, making them more congested where they can control them better. I mean, I live in a city by choice, but that's because I became so decrepit through my life experiences, beat up, combat service, what have you, that I need to be near ways to stay alive. Of course, I'm not sure that's working out too well, considering what we're in the end game here. But I would encourage all of you. Let me tell you something. Our government, the enemies of freedom and liberty and the natural law, fear most a well-read general public. A well-read general public will not allow them to persist. And they're so paranoid of that. They're scared to death of the internet, too much information. You think they drive us with fear factors. They're running in fear. They fuel on fear. They're paranoia. Look, these people are psychopaths, okay? And they've tried to create a sociopathic culture to justify their own insanity. So that the patients are running the asylum. Have we got any?
No, we're at like 5 minutes or less left, so you want to wrap it up? That's good.
Well, I'm hoping.
What are we going to talk about next week?
My intent is to start a history lesson.
Okay.
And not a philosophical or.
The desire is to talk about current events and issues, just so you know.
That's what they want.
Yeah. I mean, as in, like to use this platform more as a way to meet and discuss things that are like the raw milk thing, like something we could talk about, and like the city council, if we could start paying attention to that, we could actually.
Oh yeah.
Agenda 21.
I didn't say too much about that. Government, because I'm hoping their listeners are other than just local. But here in Nevada, Nye County just set up a way to test raw milk and distribute it safely through their county. They wanted to open it up to the entire state. It passed the state legislature with no opposition, none. Everybody voted yes. It went to the Senate. There were only 4 oppositional voices in that, and it passed. The governor vetoed it, and his reasoning was, not his own, was that the AMA and FDA said it wasn't safe, and his own health department said it wasn't safe. And I want to tell you folks, I grew up on raw milk, and then it went pasteurized, of course. But when I would go to my father's homestead with the old folks, as I said, when I was a kid, I drank raw milk.
You're alive today.
And I'm alive today. I'm allowed to tell the tale, and I've survived some experiences that most people, hopefully, never had to survive.
Why do they hate it so much?
Well, because the corporations want to control it. You got to understand that the FDA, AMA, all government regulatory departments are all about the corporate's control, corporation control of everything. Even Wall Street, look, Mifflin and some of those guys that got busted for on the securities exchange because they were taking little folks and putting them together and making money for everybody. They said that it was insider trading. Well, I got news for you. I have a very good source in the Fleet Building in London, which is City of London. The metro, is the Vatican of money. And he works on one of the upper floors. International financer, broker. And he will tell you that it is all insider trading. They go after the ones they want to. But every morning, before any of the markets open up across the world, there is a meeting in an upper suite in the Fleet Building of the representatives of, or family members of, the banking families. And they decide what's going to happen on the market that day. When I proposed that to a young lady who I was dating at the time, her father, who is well aware of what goes on in the Fleet Building, she went straight to him and said, "Michael said this." And he said, "Oh yeah, we all know about it. We all know that. It's not a big secret." So folks, let me tell you, having traveled the world and stumbled on the stuff that I probably shouldn't have, or I would have rather not have, probably. Life would have been a lot simpler for me if I'd have lived in my little box happily. It's like George Carlin. I know people want to say, "Oh, he's just a madman." But they own you. They own me. They own us. And if we don't break the chains, they'll own our future generations. And it will get worse, not better.
So next week we could maybe talk about some stuff that's going on in City Council and some Nevada issues. Only because a lot of our viewers are coming from Facebook, so, and they have to be local.
Okay.
Just possibly, maybe part of it.
What we'll try to do then is we'll try to figure out.
Yeah.
We'll try to figure. She's the one on me now, and I'm getting beat up both directions.
Yes.
We'll try to integrate touchstones of history with what's going on today, because it's the touchstones of history that have made it possible for them to do what they're doing now. And if we don't understand how they got us here, we can never understand how to unravel it. I'm telling you, you have to. And like it or not, you have to. And if you won't read about it, then I'm going to rant about it. I'm going to gonna try to open your mind to it.
All right, well, that wraps it up.
And good day. Have a good day. See you next week.